What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we are continuing our early 2020 preview with going through each team's schedule and also giving you a very early projected record for each team. Florida State is up next before we look at 2022. Let's look back at 2021. Florida State had one of the toughest schedules in the country last season. It was brutal. It wound up not being quite as bad as you thought preseason because Clemson was not as good as we thought. Florida was not as good as we thought they were going to be. I guess Notre Dame probably was pretty much as good as we thought. North Carolina wound up not being as good as we thought. Miami wound up not being as good as we thought. So it was a schedule that wound up not being as tough as we thought in the preseason. But then again, you could also say that, hey, look, Wake Forest, they were better than expected. NC State, better than expected. These were two really quality teams. So it was a tough schedule, but again, not quite the murderer's row that we thought preseason. And if you had asked me or told me before the season started that Florida State was going to beat both Miami and North Carolina, but lose to Jacksonville State, I would have told you were crazy. And that's what kind of season it was for Florida State. Just a wacky year, and not just with Florida State, but with North Carolina and Miami both not being as good as they were expected to be. You know, these were preseason top 15 teams, and they did not live up to that. So this was a schedule last year. They did have Notre Dame in the non-conference, and then Jacksonville State, UMass, and Florida. So two tough games there with Notre Dame and Florida, and then not two cupcakes, because obviously what happened with Jacksonville State. And then you look at who they played out of the Coastal. Again, it was Miami and North Carolina. We thought that those are going to be the two top teams in that division. They wound up not being that. You know, Pitt wound up winning that division. So just a crazy year last season in all of college football. But Florida State's schedule wound up just not being what we thought it was going to be. And again, tougher in some ways, easier in some ways, but it did lead them to a 5-7 record. Let's go to 2022 now. Before we go game by game, here is that schedule. Let's look at who they play outside of their division, because obviously they're going to play everyone in the ACC Atlantic Division. They'll play Duquesne. They'll play LSU in New Orleans, and that's going to be a huge game. I mean, a huge game. A lot of question marks for LSU, a new roster. I think Florida State has a real chance in that game, even though it is in New Orleans. They'll also play Louisiana. This is really the time you want to play them, though. Imagine if they had to play them last season. That was a really good team. Really, over the last couple of years, Billy Napier's gone. They lose a lot of faces there at Louisiana. I really don't know how good they're going to be. So that could be a tough game, or maybe it's a game that Florida State rolls in, and then they'll have Florida at the end of the year, of course, and that'll be a home game this year. And they'll have a great opportunity to win that game because Florida, a new head coach, and a lot of question marks for them as well. But two SEC teams on the schedule with LSU and Florida. They'll play Georgia Tech, so a pretty favorable matchup there out of the Coastal, and then they'll play Miami, who they play every year, and it will be on the road this season. So going game by game, they have a week 0 game against Duquesne. That'll be only a handful of games that first Saturday of college football, and they'll get to basically have a scrimmage there to get things started. But they'll have an extra bye week because of that, in a way, because they'll, later on in the year, they'll have 2 byes. So they'll have LSU on September the 4th. And it's nice to have that first game to kind of work the kinks out before playing LSU in a huge game, a monster game. That's an advantage for Florida. So for Florida State, I should say, I like that they scheduled that game on week 0. Could really help them out a little bit before playing LSU. Then it's Louisville on the 16th. That's a Friday night game. So all kind of things going on here. It's not just Saturday. They'll play in week 0. They'll play on a neutral field in their second game, and then they'll play on a Friday night on the road. So a very interesting schedule early, kind of gets you out of that normal routine, I guess, before they even get started having a routine for the season. They'll have Boston College on the 24th. That'll be a home game. And so, again, you look at this first month of the season, LSU and then Louisville on the road on a Friday night, that's pretty tough. That is pretty tough. Boston College should be a good one. Then we go to the month of October. They'll play Wake Forest. They will play them on the 1st. And by the way, they will have a bye week after LSU. So because they play that week 0 game, they'll have a bye week there in what would really be week 2 of the normal season. Wake Forest, and then they'll play NC State on October the 8th, and then Clemson on the 15th. So you're talking about the 3 top teams out of the division last season. They play them all in a row. Wake Forest, NC State, and then Clemson. They get a bye week after playing Clemson. You might rather have that before Clemson, but that's the way the schedule worked out. And then they'll play Georgia Tech on October 29th. So if you do want to know if Florida State is going to be a contender in the Atlantic Division, you'll know after the 15th, because after playing Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson, the top contenders in the division, if they lose, say, all 3 of those games or even 2 of those games, they're probably not going to be contenders. But if they can win even 2 out of the 3, Florida State's going to still be in the running. That is, again, if they take care of business against Louisville and Boston College. Then we go to the month of November, where they will play Miami on the 5th on the road. Huge game, of course. Then Syracuse on the 12th on the road. Back-to-back road games there. Louisiana on the 19th. Sorry to say Louisville. Louisiana on the 19th. That'll be a home game. And again, we don't really know how good that team is going to be. And then they finish off with Florida on the 25th. So a pretty tough schedule here. You got 2 SEC teams in the non-conference. Not too bad of a draw out of the Coastal with Georgia Tech. And then, of course, they play Miami every year. But this schedule, it's gonna be all about that month of October. Wake Forest, NC State, Clemson, those 3 weeks. And really, you could go even before that, starting with Louisville. You have 5 big division games in a row. Louisville, Boston College, Wake Forest, NC State, Clemson. If they're going to be contenders in the Atlantic Division, they're going to need to go 4-1 in that stretch, or at least 3-2. 3-2 might not be good enough, though, especially if one of those losses comes to Clemson. But that right there is going to tell us about Florida State and just where they stand in the ACC in 2022. Here were the projections from 2021. Of course, Florida State going 5-7. Our projection had them at 6-6. I actually personally predicted 6-6 as well, so I did agree with the projection. Don't always agree, of course, but the FBI had this team right at 6-6, 5.9 and 6.1, and then the over/under from Vegas was at 5.5. They were really right on the money as well. And I think a lot of people probably went with the over there. Not many people expected this team to go 5-7. Thought they could probably get to 6-6. It was a really tough schedule, and that did, I think, kind of keep the numbers down a little bit. But I look back at last season, and I look at one game, and that's Jacksonville State. Florida State had no business losing that game. If they had won that game, they would have been 6-6, and they would have been right along with all the projections and most people's predictions and all of that. That Jacksonville State game really ruined the season for Florida State, kept them from getting to a bowl game as well. So let's look again ahead to 2022. Here's the schedule. This is the scale that we will be using. Your 50-50 games are in white. That's a game where I think the spread will be 3 or 4 points or less. Less than 20, over 80. I think the spread is 2 touchdowns or more. Or over 2 touchdowns, and those are games that are almost guaranteed wins. You've got your 20-29 and 71-80% games. Those are games where I think the spread will be about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points, and then 30-39%, 61-70%. Those are games where I think the spread will be. Actually, I got that backwards there. 20-29%, 71-80%. That's double-digit spread. That's 10 to 14 points, kind of in that range. 61-70, 30-39, that's where we're saying the spread will be about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points for those games. So for Florida State, you got one easy win. We think one easy win. That's Duquesne on August 27th. Again, they're playing a week 0 game, which I think will help them the next week against LSU. But yeah, that's really the only easy win here. I say easy win. They lost to Jacksonville State last year, but I think this is going to be this one. This is not going to be a Jacksonville State repeat. I think they will win this game, and I think we can put them over 80%. So then you go to kind of the next section. That's going to be the blue. That's Louisiana. Maybe this should be in the green. It's kind of hard to say. Louisiana losing their head coach, losing some key players. I think they're still good enough that we probably would put them in this 80% range, 70 to 80%, but maybe in the green. The green would not change it, though. I did look at the numbers here, and if we bump that into the green and counted it as a win, it would not change the projection. So they would still have the same projection, which I'll show you here in just a second. How about your games in the purple here? Georgia Tech and Syracuse. I think Florida State will be favored by about a touchdown in both of these matchups. Games that they should win, but wouldn't be too crazy if there was an upset in one of these games, especially having to play Syracuse on the road. But yeah, I think Florida State will clearly be favorites in both of those games, and I think they will be about a touchdown favorite, again, in both of those matchups. Then you've got your games where I think Florida State will be an underdog We're talking Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. All three of these games are against teams that will probably be top 25 teams. Looking at the early and the way too early preseason rankings, we have seen all three of these teams in the top 25, even some of them, maybe even all three of them in the top 15 for a lot of people. So I think that those teams will be favored against Florida State, but I don't think it'll be a huge number. Like I said, about a touchdown, something like that. Maybe less, maybe, Wake Forest at home, maybe that one winds up being more of a 50-50 game, but we're going to put it in the yellow and say that Wake Forest will be about a 6-point favorite. Just an early guess there. And then the rest of the schedule here, really, I think you got a bunch of 50-50 games. Now, LSU, they have continued to add to their roster, and we did our LSU projection back a while ago. It's been quite a while back when I did LSU. At that time, they didn't have Jaden Daniels and some other pieces. So looking back at it now, I would put this in the yellow because the game is in New Orleans. LSU, a very talented roster, but I got to stay consistent so that these projections come out the same. So I'm going to leave it in the 50-50 range. But if we bump that down to the yellow and then we raise the Louisiana game up to the green, you kind of get the same projection. So that's the thing with these projections. People will maybe get hung up on one game and say, well, no, that game should be changed. That should be higher or lower or whatever. Usually one game's not going to change that projected record because it is an average. So keep that in mind. But Louisville, Boston College, I think Florida State will be a better team than both of them. But just look back at last year. Obviously, those games could go either way. Miami on the road, going to be a tough one, but I think it's a rivalry. I think that will be a 50-50 game. And I think Florida, even at the end of the year, will be a 50-50 game this year. It's at Florida State. Florida with some question marks. I think that's going to be a great game this year. So for me, you got 5 of these 50-50 games. That'll really determine how the season goes for Florida State. But they don't have any games that they can't win. I mean, we're talking about games in the yellow, Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. Teams can win games if they're in the yellow. Again, they're not going to be huge underdogs. They'll have a chance in those games. But on the flip side, they'll have a chance to lose to Georgia Tech or Syracuse as well. But when you average all these numbers out, you count Duquesne as a win, average the other numbers out, 50% for white, 35% for yellow, 65% for purple, 75% for blue, and you get a projection, and that projection for Florida State is 7-5. So a better projection than last year, maybe because the schedule is a little bit easier. A lot of close games. I think it's a season that could really go either way for Florida State. Yes, the projection is 7-5. I think that's pretty accurate. But it could be a 9-3 type year, or it could be a 5-7 type year. I think it will come down to a lot of close games for Florida State. But at the end of the day, the projected record for them, 7-5. Do you guys agree? Do you disagree? And give me your thoughts down in the comments below.